Father God, we are here today because you love us, because you have dealt with our sin in the most positive and creative way possible. You have, through the death of your Son Jesus, resolved the sin issue in our lives. And Lord, today I want to ask you, help us to reflect on that. Help us to look at your word today and understand it. Lord, to open our lives and allow the Spirit to do some heart surgery that needs to be done. Lord, help us to look into your word and see our reflection and to leave here challenged to be more like Jesus. Lord, thank you for each one here. Thank you for your power and presence in Jesus' name. Amen. So I asked everybody to pick up a rock as they came in out of the bucket. There is some significance. I think you'll figure out the significance as we go on through this message, but I do want to let you know that it is not to be used as a commentary on the quality of the sermon. Somebody said tomatoes hurt less. I said that wasn't the point. So if you're tempted to throw the rock, maybe you need to listen to this sermon a little closely today. But we're going to pick up a series that we started back in September. In September, we started the Gospel of John. We called it The Journey with Jesus, and we made it all the way to chapter 7 by May, and then we took some time off. And we're going to go back and pick up about 5 weeks worth, or 4 weeks worth, as we look at the 8th chapter. 8th chapter is significant. It opens up, chapter 7 concludes with the end of a conflict between Jews and Jesus, and it kind of ends anticlimactic. It says, then each went to his own home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Nothing was resolved. And that's where we pick up in John, the 8th chapter. If you want to follow along, I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'm going to just paraphrase the story. But Jesus has come back from the Mount of Olives. Some believe he's over in Bethany at Lazarus' home. He has come back over the mountain, and he is gone to the temple at dawn. It said, imagine he probably started moving way before the sun came up. And he gets to the temple at dawn, and he takes his place. And later on in the chapter, we're going to find out he took his place in the temple, or the courtyard of the women, where the offering is collected. And he comes in, and he sits down, as rabbis were accustomed to doing, and he began teaching. And people began assembling, as they always did when Jesus came in. And he's expounding his truth to the people who gather. And we don't know how long a time gap it is, but at some point during his teaching, he hears a commotion. You can almost, if you read the story, you can almost picture it in your mind that suddenly you hear some yelling and screaming. Maybe you hear a woman screaming in the background, and I don't know about you, but naturally, if I hear a commotion like that, I begin looking around to see what's going on. And he begins looking around, people begin looking around, kind of like something happened here. Jesus is doing a great message, and something happens, everybody turns and looks at the other. They kind of take attention off that. And as they look, here come a group of scribes and Pharisees dragging a woman. Now, he doesn't say that here, but I think we need to really catch on that this woman is not coming of her own volition. She's not coming because this is something she wants to do. And so they drag her in. You can almost see her half naked, scrapes and cuts from having been dragged and falling on the cobblestones as they force her, maybe arms covered with bruises, as these men have grabbed hold of her and refused to let her go. And they drag her into the temple, courtyard of the women, and they find Jesus, and almost unceremoniously, I think they stand her in front of everybody. Half naked, wounded, bleeding, humiliated. And they come to Jesus, and John tells us that they came, and after everything settled down, they said, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." I want you to take a moment just to think about the power of those words. Caught in the act. Have you ever been caught in the act of anything? Man, that's embarrassing. Caught in the act. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't something they heard about. They actually caught this woman in bed with another man. Now, I'm not sure how that happened. There are some commentators who suggest that it was probably a setup. That somehow they wanted to work out a challenge for Jesus, and so they kind of did a setup, and they came in and they drug her out, and they go to the temple and they throw her in front of Jesus, and they say, this woman was caught in the act, and according to the law, Moses tells us she must be stoned. Now, John throws an editorial comment in here. He says they were doing this. They didn't, I think if you were to really assess it, I don't think they were that concerned about the sin. They weren't concerned about the woman. They just had one thought in mind: here's a way we can trap Jesus. She's nothing more than a pawn in their chess match of trying to discredit him and destroy him. Now, the law did say, if you look at Leviticus chapter 18 and Leviticus 20 and Deuteronomy 22, you will find that God said if a man and woman are commit adultery, they are to be taken out and they are to be stoned. Did you notice something here? They. Now go back to that little phrase, caught in the act. If she's caught in the act, obviously there's a man involved. What's your question? Where's the man? Where is the man in the story? And that tells me they weren't concerned at all about it. They were just simply trying to trick Jesus. And you see, because if Jesus said, stone her, then they could turn him over to the Romans because he would be usurping authority for the Romans that they had taken away from the Jews. If he said, let her go, then they could totally discredit him in the eyes of the Jewish people in regards to the law. They thought they had him. And if you take a moment to look up the Mishnah, which is the written law of the Jews, adultery even had a worse penalty. For the guy, the woman was stoned, but the man, he was to be taken out, buried in his knees up in mud, and then a rope was to be put around his throat, and two guys on each side were to strangle him. A little drastic. But so here we have these guys trying to ensnare Jesus. Not really concerned about her, but wanting to trap him. And what does Jesus do? I love this because it says he squats down and he begins writing on the ground. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about, we have absolutely no idea what he was doing. But some translations say he wrote and acted as if he didn't hear them. And he's just doodling whatever is on the ground. And John says they kept asking, they kept pressing, they kept pushing. And finally, Jesus reached the limit, and he stands up and he said, okay, those of you or anyone here who is without sin, cast the first stone. Get any idea about the rock in your hand? The word actually means not literal sin, but the word means anybody here who has never been tempted, never thought about ever doing something like this woman's done, throw the first stone. You see, because Jesus redefined adultery. In Matthew 5, he says, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you, if you've even thought about it in your mind, you are guilty of it. So Jesus said, okay, guys, here's the thing. If you've never looked at a woman with a lustful thought, if you've never imagined sleeping with another woman, then go ahead and throw the stone. And then he sat down and started writing again. And slowly, I don't know how slowly, but one by one, I can almost hear the rocks hitting the ground. as these guys turn and walk away. It says from the older to the younger. Most older people understand their frailties and flaws, and they all dissipate. And Jesus, almost as if he wasn't paying attention, turns to the woman, and he said, "Woman, where are those who are condemning you? They're not here." And then Jesus says these words, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, leave your life of sin." Now, we're going to get into this, and we're going to think about it a little bit more, but sometimes we hear Jesus saying something to this woman he doesn't say. But there are so many things in the story we could look at, but my eyes went to the image of how we treat sinners. In this story, there are 8 ways to treat a sinner. 4 of them, I think, are representative of the Pharisees, and I think representative of the way Satan would treat us in our sin. 4 reflect the heart of God. And so I want to look at those, and maybe through that process, hopefully we begin, because I've seen myself reflected in a lot of these. And maybe at some point during this message, you might just want to drop the rock. But let's look at how to treat a sinner. How does the story tell us to treat a sinner? Let me start the first one by saying I see some people respond to sin as moral watchdogs. That's the Pharisees. What's the purpose of a watchdog? To what? To be alert of what's going on. They patrol property to keep people out. And when somebody crosses the boundary, what does a watchdog do? Attacks. He makes a lot of commotion, begins barking, begins drawing attention, and ultimately attacks the invader. That's a perfect image. I see the Pharisees here. Because they were so self-righteous, because they were so convinced about how honorable and righteous they were, they appointed themselves the watchdogs, the moral watchdogs of Israel. And they kept an eye on everybody. And when somebody got out of line, they were quick to pounce, they drew attention, and they centered. And look at the way they treat this woman. They want everybody to know that person has failed. It's possible for us to take the role of moral watchdogs, guys. To think that I have the responsibility to keep an eye on everybody here. And boy, when John jumps out of line, I'm going to nail him and make sure everybody else knows he failed. That's the way the Pharisees treated this woman. That's the way they treated Jesus. They were watching him, pouncing on every opportunity to draw people's attention to him. When you walk to a property, it says, "Beware of dog," what do? Anybody go in? We avoid it, right? Think about the impact. If a church or an individual has the reputation of being moral watchdogs, where they nail people and attack people every time they see a sin, what are people going to do to them? They're going to avoid them at all costs. And I want to suggest that's why some churches aren't growing. Because people are afraid to come in because they're afraid they're going to be singled out. But let's also see that we can define people by their sin. No, I thought of this last night. I added this saying. It says, Satan knows your name and calls you by your sin. Jesus knows your sin and calls you by your name. Notice in the story, how is this woman identified? She is caught in adultery, and therefore she is, from that point on, an adulteress. They don't care about her name. They don't care about her personality. To them, all she is her sin. Satan, as he looks at you, all you are is your sin. And let me say I, because I don't know about you guys, but I am guilty of looking at people and defining them by their sin rather than understanding them as an individual. And I know none of you have ever used this phrase, but you look at someone, don't know them, you look at them, and immediately the word tweaker comes out of their mouth. And that person is defined by the sin we think they've committed. We don't take the time to find out about them. We don't take time to find out what they're going through and how they've come to that place. We just label them. We label people liars. We label people murderers. We label people thieves. We label them 100 different ways and never know them as a person. They are their sin. And they lose their personality. We can emphasize the rules over people. I like this picture. The problem with legalism in the church is that it cancels out God's grace, which never makes God smile. The Pharisees were rule keepers. They didn't care. All they wanted to know was the rules. They kept the rules, and it didn't matter why anybody violated them. If you look at Matthew chapter 12, you find Jesus and his disciples are walking along the road. If I can find it. Put all these things in here, and then I can't find them. Matthew 12 says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said, look, your disciples are doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath. They didn't care that they were hungry. They didn't care that it was legal. They just cared that a rule was being broken and it couldn't be let it pass. Jesus, in another place, he asked the Pharisees, think about, on the Sabbath, is it right to heal a man or not? And of course, their answer was no, because that violates the rules. Now, I want you to hear me. I'm not saying rules aren't important. But I want us to understand that sometimes people break rules because of circumstances in their lives. Because something has led them to that place. In the book of Proverbs, I think it is, it talks about a man stealing bread. If he steals bread to feed his family who's hungry, the penalty was a little bit less than a man who just stole it for no other reason. What are the circumstances going on in that person's life? What's happening? What has led them to that place? Did anybody ask the woman, why have you resorted to prostitution? It could be that she was a widow and had nobody else to take care of her. It could be that she was a daughter whose family had died and she was trying to make a living and support herself any way she possibly could. Doesn't diminish the sin, doesn't diminish the fact that a rule is broken, but it certainly changes the perspective on things when we understand the details. You know, in dealing with sinners, sometimes we can become people who emphasize the rules. We just care that a rule is broken rather than understanding the circumstances behind it. Pharisees were into condemnation, not restoration. There's a program on DIY called Rehab Addict. Not that kind of rehab, not that kind of addict. Nicole Curtis, she restores houses in inner city Detroit. She goes and buys houses from the city that have been condemned, and she goes in and looks at houses that everyone would say, let's just take a bulldozer and take it off the lot and build something new. And this is her phrase. She says, I see these old houses and I want to restore them to their former glory. I thought about that statement this week because I don't think anything captures the heart of God more than that desire. What do we see when we look at people? Do we see wasted lives? Do we see lives that just should be shut aside and put away and never seen again? Or do we see people who have sacrificed a former glory and we're willing to work towards restoring them? What do you see when you look at an old dilapidated house? A lot of work. What do you see when you... Dan, what do you see when you see a rusted 54 Ford? Something to take to the junkyard? Dan sees it as something, there's something worth restoring. What a difference that would make in the way we look at people. If I look at people and understand they're victims, if I look at their lives and see that they are where they are because of sin, but we can restore them. The Pharisees didn't care. They just wanted those people gone. They just wanted this woman destroyed, not restored. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. But let's never be mistaken that God has in mind for us to be in the restoration business. Galatians 6:1. He says, brothers, if you see a brother caught in a sin, nail him to a wall. Right? Restore him gently. Folks, as believers, as disciples and followers of Jesus, we have one job. And that is to help people find the former glory they had as creatures, as beloved people that God had a plan for. Our job is restoration, not condemnation. But let's be clear. Those four things we've looked at are all the ways Satan deals with us, right? We can deal with people that way. But then we see Jesus. And let's look at how, and let's be clear. Jesus is dealing he starts out not dealing with the sin of the woman. Let's divest ourselves of that. His main focus is he's dealing with the sin of those men who have come to this place and tried to trap him. He'll also deal with the sin of the woman, but she's not his focus. There's two sinners he's dealing with. And let's look at how he deals with them. Number one, there's compassion. There is compassion. He looks around and his heart breaks. His heart hurts. Because this woman and these men have come to a place in their life that God never intended to be. He wanted to help. Matthew 9, 35 through 36 said Jesus went around healing in the provinces, and he saw the people, and he had compassion on them because they were helpless and like sheep without a shepherd. You look at a sinner. Why are they where they are? Because they've been abused, they've been misled, they've been lied to, they've been victimized. One man said, there, but for the grace of God, go I. It happens. It can happen to all of us. Jesus saw these men, he saw the woman, and his heart broke. How does our heart respond when we see people caught in sin? I watch the events on news. I see people burning down their neighborhoods. I see people destroying other people. I don't understand it. But my heart hurts. Because that's never where God intended them to be. So he dealt with them with compassion. He brought conviction rather than condemnation. Now, I understand condemnation and conviction seem like they mean the same thing, but they are worlds apart. Condemnation pushes people from Christ. Hey, what's condemnation? This is the way it works. It always reminds you of your failure. It always defines you by your failure. It always tells you you will never be any more than you are right now, and you might as well just give up. That's Satan. If you're sitting around, there are days I go and I literally look in the bathroom mirror, and I have had days when I look in the mirror and I look at myself and I say, Don, you're absolutely worthless. That's condemnation. You might as well give up. You're never going to amount to anything. That's condemnation. Conviction is helping me see that I have messed up. Helping me see that there is hope. That there is a way out of where I'm at. Condemnation is a tool of Satan. Conviction is the tool of the Spirit. John 16 said, when the Spirit comes, He will convict you. Now, conviction is when I do something and I sit back and say, and I hear that voice saying, you're better than that. That's not worth you. You need to make a decision to change. Jesus always brought conviction. Now, through His preaching, I don't think anybody could ever sit through a sermon that Jesus preached and not come away saying, man, I need to do something. But also, He brought conviction just by walking into a room. Jesus was so righteous and so morally excellent that He'd walk into a room and people got the feeling that, yeah, I need to stay away from Him because He makes me feel bad. Do you have anybody you've ever been uncomfortable being around because they were so good? They made you feel convicted just being around them? I want to suggest that some of that's the reason why this building isn't full. There are people in our community that want to come to church because they know who they are. And they don't want to be reminded of it. And there are people who will avoid you at work and in the community because they know when they're around you, they're reminded of who they are. That's conviction. So Jesus was one who always convicted people. He also confronted them. Now, confrontation's a strong word, right? We think of confrontation, we think of getting in somebody's grill. We think of fingers pointing and words and shouting. But confrontation can come in a lot of different ways. Jesus always confronted sin. He never condoned it. Notice when He's talking about the woman, notice He doesn't say, it's okay, I understand, now you just go on and live your life. He never said she was okay. He never said, it's okay. He made it clear He understood she was guilty. He wanted her to know that what she was doing was wrong. Jesus confronted it oftentimes with love. He made people understand that what they were doing was not God's design and God's plan. And sometimes He got a little bit aggressive about it. Think about the temple. He went in and fashioned a cord and He began driving the money changers and animals out of the temple. Matthew chapter 23, I never want to be in the target of Jesus when He starts ripping and telling the truth about me. But notice, all those aggressive confrontations were reserved for a certain group of people. Self-righteous people. People who thought they had it all together. The ones who didn't have it all together, Jesus was compassionate, caring, and loving. You think about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, I'm going to your house today. And they sat down and they had dinner. But the process of that, Zacchaeus was convicted and he understood his life was not right, but it was confronted. Folks, we have to confront sin, not aggressively, not with anger, not with condemnation, but we need to make sure people understand what we understand about God's Word, that something is wrong when God says it's wrong. I fear sometimes we inadvertently let people think we are condoning sin because we never say anything about it, or we ignore it, and by our silence, people say, well, it must be okay. This week, talking to the preachers, one guy said, I have 20-somethings in the church that don't think my ideas of sexual morality really make sense. And we're living in a world that's like that. Look, it may cause the church to shrink in size, but we have to be clear on what's right and what's wrong, lovingly. Last thing we see happening is a challenge to change. Now, I have been guilty in my life of reading this story and said, it is just wonderful how Jesus forgave this woman. Do you see that in there anywhere? We teach it, but he didn't do it. He does not extend forgiveness. Because other places says your sins are forgiven, go and sin no more. He says go and sin no more. Leave your life of sin. Number one, all the prerequisites for finding forgiveness aren't there. The woman has not come of her own accord. She's been drugged there. Anybody ever been drugged to church? She's there not because she wants to be. There is never any indication that she is sorry for what she has done. Maybe sorry she got caught. And she never once asks him to forgive her. Jesus' statement is this: neither do I condemn you. I'm not cutting you off. I'm not saying you're without hope. I'm the only one here that could really rightfully condemn you, but I'm not doing it. And it's important. Most of the commentators said it's important for us to look in there and say, I'm not condemning you now. You're guilty. You're worthy of judgment, but I'm withholding that judgment. I'm withholding that condemnation. I'm giving you an opportunity to go and change your life. Implied in all that is there is a condemnation coming. There is a judgment coming, and unless you change, you are going to face it. And so he says, here's your opportunity. Go and leave your life of sin. What's he challenging her to do? A word we use all the time. Repent. Change your way of life. Turn away and go the other direction. Now, I'm not saying this woman was never forgiven. I'm not saying it. But at this point in time, Jesus is not wiping the slate clean for her. He said, you're not being condemned now. But you have an opportunity to go out and change your life. And change your way of living. That's important. And Jesus ends this sermon for me. And he says, go and leave your life of sin. That is the challenge for every one of us in this room. Whether we are the Pharisees, I forgot to pick up a rock. Whether we are the Pharisees who need to drop the rock and walk away and change the way we deal with sinners, or whether we're the woman caught in the act of whatever sin it is. Caught in the act of adultery, caught in the act of stealing, caught in the act of lying, caught in the act, burdened and labeled and under the condemnation of sin. Jesus' challenge is go and change. Go. Leave your life of sin. And it's an opportunity to get out from under the condemnation. Because Jesus could say that because he had one thing, he knew one thing. It wasn't going to be very long before he's going to get nailed to a cross, and his blood is going to be shed, his life is going to be forfeit so that sin can be forgiven. He's going to absorb the condemnation that is mine so that I might be restored and whole and new. But in order to get that, I have to leave my life of sin. I have to turn my back on it. I have to commit myself and trust to Jesus Christ as my Savior. I have to be willing to obey Him and follow Him. We're going to talk about that a little bit next week. But follow Him. And Scripture lays it out. If you want to be forgiven, if you want a new life, if you want life restored, believe in Jesus, repent of your sin, confess Him before men, be baptized for the forgiveness of sin and the Holy Spirit, and then make Him Lord of your life and begin living for Him. So we're all here today, and the message Jesus has for us is go. Leave your life of sin. Now, I don't know what you want to do with that rock. I don't know if you want to throw it at me because I've been harsh, whether you want to drop it, or whether you want to take it home and set it on a shelf as a reminder. But the challenge for us is go. Leave your life of sin. We're going to take some time to remember the opportunity Jesus has given us. Through the bread and through the juice, we're going to be reminded of the fact that He came and paid the price for my sin. That I could be restored to my former glory. That I could be perfect in His eyes. So those who are going to serve communion, if you would make your way to the back, I want to pray before those emblems are distributed. Father, today you have opened your word to us. Lord, there are so many times and so many ways that we fail. But Lord, today as we come to this table, we remember that our failures are not final. The blood and the body of Jesus were shed for us that we might be restored. Lord, it's not about condemnation. Jesus never condemns. He convicts us and calls us to do better than we are, to live a life forsaking sin. Lord, speak to us during this time. Help us to understand where we are. Spirit, open our hearts and our eyes to know what we need to do today. In Jesus' name, amen.
In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus, oh give me Jesus, give me Jesus, oh you can have all this world, just give